Welcome to the Engerati studio here at Itron Utility Week, and I'm joined now by Erik Anderson from WaterSmart. And Erik, first of all, welcome and thanks for making the time to be here. And one of the things that we were talking off air about is, and it's interesting for me to be here, is some of the needs for infrastructure investment in water. Some of the need for investment in wet infrastructure and so on. But one of the good things about a good interviewer is to let the interviewee talk. So can we start off on that? What's your position around that sort of area?
Yeah, well, it's common in these conferences, and even in the keynote speaker this morning, there was a point that was people like to talk about the problems, but not about the solutions. So we'll touch briefly on the problem, which is the lack of investment in infrastructure in the water system, particularly in this country, and I'm sure in other countries around the world. And depending on which research you read or which analyst you speak to, it's somewhere between $1 trillion to $5 trillion that are needed to rehabilitate and modernize the water delivery system in this country to keep it available and clean and pure and to rebuild all this.
And also, just from a purely physical standpoint, there are areas in this country where the water delivery is over vast distances as well. So that must add another complexity to things as well.
Yeah, distance matters. Whether there's lead in the system matters. There's even wooden pipes in some parts of the country, depending on the time that it was built. So there's a huge amount of infrastructure, plus all of the rapid population changes and growth that we've seen in the South and Southwest in particular.
So you're saying that the order of magnitude of the gap is about $1 trillion, or there or thereabouts. It's already a big scary number. We can add some more zeros to it if you want.
Huge number, yeah.
What are you seeing about how that is being addressed?
So Bluefield Research out of Boston did a report recently that said over the next 10 years, they expect about $500 billion in capital spending. So that's great that the utilities are planning to spend $500 billion over 10 years, so $50 billion a year, but that still leaves a huge gap that's unfunded. So the challenge for the community here is that how are they going to overcome that gap between what's needed and what funds are available today.
And what are you seeing about that? Because again, in preparing for this interview, I was reading up things on your website, and I was telling you off air, I leveraged some of my analyst relationships, and I read a few reports. And you said something a little bit around the need for stakeholder engagement. So can we break that down a little bit? So who are the stakeholders, and how do you see that engagement working?
Yeah, the stakeholders are many. I mean, obviously there's the regulators in the communities and states in which these organizations operate. There's the customers themselves, and someone even mentioned that we're not talking about ratepayers anymore. We're using the word customers, which is a great transition. And then there are also regional operators like wholesalers, and even within the customer segment, they have tenants. If you're a building owner, you have landscape contractors, you have building managers, you have homeowners associations. So there's this whole complex web of stakeholders that you have to consider.
And when you have such a complex web, and again, much like Europe, to the uninitiated people who are not in this industry think, well, there must be one regulatory framework because it's the United States. That's not true. There's all these. So that's a whole other layer of complexity, which we won't go to today, right? Okay, you can breathe a sigh of relief there. But how do you bring that complexity together and actually translate it into something where you can start opening up capital in order to solve some of those problems?
Yeah, the only way you're going to be able to restructure rates and to be able to have a conversation to get support, because the money's got to come from higher rates, higher taxes, some kind of assessment, bonds, borrowing. Someone's got to pay for that. In the end, it's the customer, right? That's directly or indirectly funding that spending, and so you have to connect with them and make it what's in it for you, what's in it for them, right? To make sure that they're on board.
So if we then bring it closer to home, and on your website you had a guest blog by Richard Luthi, who's a professor for civil environmental engineering at Stanford, and he made a point that actually within California, and everybody here knows this, but I'm putting it into context for our more international audience. There was a need to drive down water use by 25%, and that was done through a fairly good PR campaign and so on, so that was big tick. But at the customer side of things, the rates actually went up. So there's a bit of a disconnect. Hey, I'm saving all this water, but my rate is going up. But what's that all about? How do we engage with people at the receiving end of this who are not in the industry? So you can't have a big long conversation with every single one. How do you create that engagement?
Yeah, and that's really how WaterSmart was born, from that need to be able to connect with customers, not in a mass communication or broadcast medium, which has historically been one way that utilities communicate. The second way being the bill, and that's also not a great moment to interact with your customers. So what we came up with was a way to address. We were born out of the conservation challenge in California, and we bloomed into a whole communication platform for utilities. So part of that is stakeholder engagement. So we have to say, every customer needs to be like a snowflake. Everyone's unique, everyone's different. Your home is different, your business is different. You have an apartment, you have a big yard, you have a small yard, you have a swimming pool. How do you connect with that customer in a meaningful, actionable, relevant way, one by one, in a mass customization kind of a communication method, so that what I'm hearing is relevant to me, and so that I get an understanding, well, wow, I do need to save water because of this drought, for example. But in other parts of the country, it may be, well, I need to help get behind this rate increase because I care about public health, I care about the value of water, I care about what's available to the community, so I need to do this.
And how do you then use that information? So that's one side of things, right? So you're engaging with consumers, you're trying to drive some sort of behavioral change, there's a part of education and so on. And from what you're saying, how engaged are people with this exercise? And I suppose water is slightly different, it's an essential need as well. So how do you square that as well?
Yeah, part of it is communication, as I mentioned, but also you have to give the consumer resources and tools and advice that's relevant and actionable and useful to them. So when we got into this, we decided that, for example, Itron has this amazing leak detection capability, and so we said, well, how can we leverage that to not just say to the customer, hey, you have a leak, but hey, you have a leak, and here are 10 things that you can do about it, and we're going to walk you through a step-by-step process to identify where the leak is in your home, how to protect your property, how to take care of this yourself, and how does that help the utility? They don't get the angry phone call from the high bill, or the complaint, or the surprise, bill that comes in the mail. And we're giving resources and tools to the customer around whether it's leak detection, water quality, affordability programs, all these things that there's something in it for the customer, right? That's what we're trying to do. It's not just about advice.
And what sort of environment, from an infrastructure point of view, do you need to do? Because it's always one of those things. I mean, you're a software company, right? And the evolution of your software program and your software algorithms are at one level also beholden to the amount of sensors and the type of sensors that you're getting the data back from. Where are we in that evolution where, leak detection is a thing that is provided? Are you seeing that being provided as a service? Will you guys provide it, or is that the utilities for, is there anything in that sort of interplay between a third party being able to provide some of those services as well?
Yeah, and the way we approach it is that we are behind the curtain, so to speak, for the utility. So anything that we do as WaterSmart, we brand as the utility. So whether it's a leak detection from an AMI system or any sort of customer engagement, we're putting ourselves backstage and putting the utility front stage, because that's who the utility has to earn the love and support from their community. And so we really focus on making sure that all of our resources are available for the community in the name of the utility.
And in doing that, and in collecting all this data in one place, are you also able to be a part of the sort of the ability to build business cases and ROI? Because that surely must be a part of it. So by now having having all of this in one place, you can actually just take that and go, listen, we are seeing X, and therefore an investment of Y will give us this result. Do you play a role in that side of things?
Yeah, it's an important piece, the ROI, and whether it's justifying a move to smart metering or AMI systems, or it's just an investment in WaterSmart, we help the customer think through, well, what does that mean to invest in software? What outcomes? And the outcomes are really important. We don't just sell software, we're selling outcomes, and so does Itron. We really believe in that principle, is that you have to say, well, how are customer service calls or costs going to go down? How are operational costs going to go down? How is revenue going to be protected for the utility? And how is customer satisfaction going to grow? And the support of the community get stronger? And those are the kinds of things we put into it. Sometimes they're difficult to quantify, especially with things like customer satisfaction and support from the community, but we want to do both that subjective as well as the objective ROI measures for our customers.
And there's a lot of talk about focusing on outcomes, and you've mentioned a raft of those. And it is true that customer satisfaction piece is probably the hardest to do. How important is it actually? Isn't it an outcome? The customer satisfaction outcome is directly related to operational efficiency. I want my tap to work when it turns on. It isn't that hard, is it? Because if all that operational stuff is working really well, your customer satisfaction must be all right.
Yeah, that's true. And customer satisfaction is one of those things that will get you that rate increase or get you that support from the public to make those investments in wet infrastructure that we talked about earlier. You have to have the support of the community in order to get these investments to happen. And even when you think about, well, we built the WaterSmart platform to work with any kind of technology. We didn't want to just be a smart meter company or a smart technology.
Is it in the cloud?
It's all in the cloud,
right.
And so, but we'll work with any sort of, whether it's AMR or AMI or even manual read meters, because everyone's on a journey. Every utility in this room is on a journey, and so we want to be able to work with those utilities wherever they are on that journey. But helping make that bridge to AMI, because so many are going to be moving to advanced metering infrastructure, we want to be there to help them immediately bring benefits to the community as they roll that out. Because if you wait until the very end of such a project, no one really cares, right? You want to know, well, we're doing this huge investment in AMI, and you're going to win from the first day, dear customer.
And just as we're coming to the end of our time here, are there certain things that you're working on where you would actually like to see the industry work faster? Because it's always one of those push and pull effects. I mean, okay, we can't ignore the regulatory effect of this as well. I mean, I was talking to a utility exec, and he said, listen, we're innovating as fast as the regulatory environment is. Mm-hmm. We can't go any faster. We could if we didn't have to. Mm-hmm. So from your side of things, I mean, from a software company perspective, is there anything where you're like, hey, look, we can do this now if only they'd let us?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that, especially in the investor-owned utility space in this country. There's a bias in some of the regulatory regime toward capital expenditures and on-premises software from a regulatory treatment. And software as a service really hasn't been thought through in terms of the regulatory framework, especially for investor-owned utilities. That's something that I think is going to change and could change quicker.
And so just to finish off on that point, so it is still from a regulatory perspective, which is stopping the SaaS adoption.
Particularly in the investor-owned utility space, that's true, yeah.
And what do we, as the technology community, need to do to change some of that perception? Where is it coming from? Is it still that old notion of it's less secure, or I feel great because I can see the box with the blinking lights? Are we rewinding that much?
There may be some of that going on, but I think it's I think that there's a historical bias, from an accounting principles and revenue recovery perspective in the regulatory framework, again, for investor-owned utilities. For municipal utilities, a lot of them are happy to embrace the cloud because we see them say, gosh, I don't have the security infrastructure that Microsoft spoke about earlier today. I don't have the IT chops to pull this off, all the backups and recovery and all the sophistication.
And they're much more happy to work in an OPEX thing rather than a CAPEX write-off type thing.
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing that as absolutely.
And on that note, we must leave it because we've come to the end of it. I've enjoyed talking to you. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you as well for watching. It's another interview at Itron Utility Week in association with Engerati. Thanks again.